Independence Day. And wildfires continue to rage on the west coast of the United States. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, and this is From the South. The Anti-Imperialist Solidarity Meeting for Democracy and Against Neoliberalism has started in Havana, Cuba. Thousands of delegates from across the world are in attendance for the three-day event, which runs until Sunday. According to organizers, one of the goals of the event is to strengthen the bonds of solidarity between nations and to support the historic struggles of the Palestinian, Sahrawi, and Venezuelan people, among others. The meeting will also discuss issues threatening nations in the global south, like wars and climate change.
We can feel it in this room, the deep commitment to our people's struggle and the solidarity you have for Cuba, for which we are very grateful. The government of Donald Trump is the main threat to global peace and security. We have seen that the philosophy of deprivation does not stop, and it leads to war. The United States continues to interfere in the internal affairs of our nations. Capitalism is unreliable. The capitalist model of endless consumption is irrational and non-sustainable, only generating inequality. It aggravates climate change and is driving us towards our own extinction. As the United States walks away from international accords like the Paris Agreement, we can say that there will be no sustainable development for global South nations, as there can be no sustainable development without social justice.
A new massacre has been reported in Colombia's Cauca department, bringing the death toll in the region to 11 over the past 48 hours. According to local media, two armed men murdered 4 people on the street in Santa Elena, while another person was killed in Guasano. The victims were part of a team of engineers that were carrying out field work in the area. This comes less than 2 days after 8 people were murdered in the same region. In response to the growing violence, President Ivan Duque has ordered the militarization of the area. In 2019 alone, 115 indigenous people have been killed in the department of Cauca. Students took to the streets of Bogota, Colombia on Thursday to demand that the government provides more resources for education. The protesters say that public universities are falling apart and that teachers have not been paid for a number of months. They also condemned widespread corruption in the institutions and called on authorities to step in.
People can learn from us, and they can see that our protest is righteous. They can inform themselves, and they can also join the protest and suddenly work together as Chile and Ecuador are doing right now.
Over 100 people have been detained in Panama during popular protests. People have taken to the streets in opposition to a constitutional reform package they say infringes on their civil rights. Early on Thursday, police set up barricades around the National Assembly building, hoping to dissuade citizens from demonstrating. But people marched on the building anyway, as police responded to the peaceful march with tear gas and rubber bullets. Now, earlier we spoke with Richard Morales. He's a professor of political science at the University of Panama and an executive member of the Broad Front for Democracy Party. He explained why the Panamanian people are so unhappy with the planned reforms.
This is a package of reforms that was imposed by an illegitimate committee or commission that is basically a front for the main business sector in the country. And it's basically a series of reforms that modify the country's institutions to preserve the power of the political and economic elite. Those reforms were then taken to the National Assembly, where they were worsened even more so than in their original form. They are reforms that reduce the division of powers in the country, that concentrate more power in a corrupt assembly, that reduce the recognition of human rights in the country, that deal a mortal blow to the country's social security system, to the right to water. In essence, these are reforms that gravely endanger the social rights of the Panamanian people. the last few days there have been mass protests around the National Assembly. Those protests have been led by youth movements, by a youth sector which has found the strength to resist the repression that the government has tried to use to impose those reforms. The government has not responded to the youth sectors, to the citizens' cries for more dialogue. They have instead tried to impose those interests of the elite through those reforms on the people. They have used violent repression. There were many injured people in the violent repression that went on yesterday night. But the people have once again come out to protest today.
Shifting gears now, Bolivian social movements held a vigil in defense of democracy amid concern about opposition sectors not respecting the results of the country's presidential election. Miners, campesinos, and other social organizations arrived on Thursday at Plaza Moreno from different parts of the country in order to counter opposition protests and a call for a general strike after President Evo Morales' victory. Now, the Bolivian Communications Minister Manuel Canelas has condemned opposition leaders for constantly changing their position in regards to the election results. The minister was speaking after opposition figure Luis Fernando Camacho's latest remarks, calling for another election. Canelas called for the Santa Cruz Civic Committee leader to be more responsible and serious with the political positions he takes, given the tense climate in Bolivia at the moment.
Last time, Mr. Camacho said he would propose new elections with Evo Morales as a candidate. The changes of opinion Mr. Camacho has are striking. He's not being serious enough given the tense situations that we have in the country. Furthermore, these latest changes may be the most revealing, pointing out that the decisions of the President of the Civic Committee are not taken into account by members. Rather, they are taken into account by very few people who have political and economic interests.
The Bolivian Communications Minister Manuel Canelas says that opposition leader Carlos Mesa was asked to provide the conditions he feels necessary in order to join the election audit, which is taking place in conjunction with several international organizations.
Yesterday, we requested that Carlos Mesa send us his conditions in order to join and participate in the audit being carried out with the OAS and the European Union. It is clear that when an international auditing process that could change the results is being carried out, the audit has to be the final voice. I believe that everyone knows the audit is binding.
Meanwhile, the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has congratulated Bolivia's President Evo Morales on his victory and rejected the destabilization attempts by the opposition. He was speaking as an international meeting of indigenous peoples takes place in Bolivar State.
Evo Morales, por cuarta vez ha sido...
Evo Morales has been re-elected by his people for the fourth time. 2 months ago, I called Evo because I saw about a meeting of the oligarchy in Santa Cruz on Telesur, at which they said that if Evo Morales won the elections, they would not recognize his victory. And then, losing candidate Carlos Mesa repeated it. He said on election day that he wouldn't recognize the results, and now they want to destabilize Bolivia. And they are applying the same formula they've applied in Venezuela. And Venezuela, with patience, defending peace, was able to triumph. I'm sure that the people of Bolivia, with Evo Morales, with patience, defending the Constitution and peace, will also triumph like Venezuela did. Of that, I'm sure.
President Maduro also said that the indigenous people should be the soul of the greatest changes that humanity needs.
The indigenous peoples, the aboriginal peoples, should be the soul of the greatest changes that humanity needs in order to ensure justice, equality, and the natural happiness of the human being. We will achieve it in the 21st century. I have no doubt that we will achieve it.
In some Caribbean news, Antigua and Barbuda is celebrating its 38th independence from British rule. The event was kicked off with a military parade before Head of State and representative of the Queen, Governor General Rodney Williams. If or when Antigua becomes a republic, then they will have a president. For the past week, the Twin Island hosted competitions, marches, expos and food fairs in the lead up to the big day. Antigua gained total independence on November 1st, 1981, when for the first time in 328 years, the Union Jack was lowered and replaced with the Antiguan flag, and then the Antiguan national anthem was sung.
Independence for a small nation such as ours is a fragile plant. It requires continuous nurturing to withstand battering forces, external and internal, that could weaken or extinguish it. That is why none of us should play in the hands of those who would encourage the destruction of our state and the well-being of our people so that they can rule over its ruins. There is a place for political disagreement and dissent. But all of us must know where the line is drawn between political disagreement and national anarchy. Today, therefore, on this 38th anniversary of our country's independence, as one people, one nation with a common destiny, I urge that we deafen our ears to the siren songs of disunity and discord that will sink our ship of state on the rocks of disaster.
Iraqis are protesting for a second month, and there doesn't seem to be an end date in sight. Stay with us for more on this and other developments.
According to the National Statistic Institute, in the past 5 years, the number of people internally displaced due to violence increased to over 100,000. Many families tell the same story of having to flee their homes when criminal gangs try to recruit their children.
I
had to walk on my own to Guatemala and then to Mexico. When I got to Mexico, it was clear this place was not right for me. I couldn't find my brothers, so I returned to Guatemala and I spent a few months in Tecumuan in a correctional facility for minors.
Forced migration is most common in the bigger cities, where gangs operate on a much larger scale, in the same places where the government says it is working to combat violence.
Many children are displaced, with or without their families. They are victims of criminal gangs who force them into their ranks. What we see is violence directly and specifically at kids, and the response from the government continues to be extremely inadequate.
According to the Casa Alianza organization, thousands of children have fled the country in recent years due to the situation. At a rate of 2 kids per hour, they left their communities either with their families or alone, in order to save their own lives.
Every day, the situation worsens. Every year, over 50,000 children drop out of school. Today, we have more children who've been deported or are migrating than we have children on the street. Just until October, 21,000 children have been deported.
Meanwhile, the government has been increasing the national security budget on an annual basis, but so far there has been no impact on the number of people fleeing their homes.
What is clear, and despite the many variables as to why people are fleeing, is that the government is failing miserably. No matter how much money they throw at the budget, their system is inefficient.
According to official statistics, 56% of school-aged Honduran children cannot go to school due to poverty or because they are in danger of being forcibly displaced.
As anti-government protests enter its second month in Iraq, the country's top cleric warned foreign actors against interfering. Security forces have violently repressed protesters with 250 dead so far. The demonstrations have evolved since October 1st, from rage over corruption and unemployment to demands for a total regime change. They've also condemned paramilitary who've sparked fears of a confrontation with the main protests.
The protests are communal and lack any foreign intervention. Whoever said that there's foreign intervention in the protests is the one who is foreign and outside the law of Islam.
The members of the government and Iraqi rule are all thieves, from Prime Minister Adel Abdel Mahdi to al-Maliki since 2003 until now. What have you accomplished? You have done nothing. You destroyed us.
Thousands have gathered in Algeria's capital for a mass rally as the nation celebrates the 65th anniversary of the war that won its independence from France. Protesters took over the streets outside the Grand Poste building in downtown Algiers by early afternoon to demand a new revolution. They chanted, "Algeria will take back its independence," and "the people want their independence." Since February 22nd, demonstrations have occurred for 37 consecutive Fridays. Police were deployed in force, making several arrests in the morning. The Algiers metro was closed and all trains to the capital cancelled in a bid to keep the numbers down. South Africa's Equality Court has thrown out the case in which Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan had sued opposition leader Julius Malema for calling him a dog of white monopoly capitalism. Gordhan, through his lawyers, argued that Malema should be judged with hate speech and incitement of public violence. However, in its ruling, the court said while Malema's utterances were harsh and hateful, Gordhan's legal team failed to prove that they violated the Equality Act and thereby constituted hate speech. The victims of recent ethnic clashes in Ethiopia have appealed to the government to take strong measures to avoid a repeat of last week's violence. Speaking from their hospital beds, the victims also called on the government to ensure that those behind the violence are held accountable.
They killed my brother and I was standing in front of my brother's dead body. Then they came and beat me with the stones and they slashed open my lower abdomen.
That God knows, but for me it must not occur again, because this is very bad and very severe injury, a lot of injuries. I hope it must occur again.
Turkey is mobilizing its units for a joint patrol of the Syrian border with Russia. Don't go anywhere. Depth of 10 kilometers, but earlier this week, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said the patrols would be carried out at a depth of just 7 kilometers. YPG fighters were given a 150-hour deadline to retreat to a depth of 30 kilometers south of the border inside Syria. Turkey views the YPG as a terrorist organization because of its links to Kurdish militants in southeast Turkey and launched its offensive in early September. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump removed 1,000 forces, abandoning his former allies. 7 people are feared dead after a South Korean Fire Department helicopter crashed near a disputed island in the Sea of Japan. The helicopter was transporting an injured fisherman from the island of Dokdo to a hospital on the mainland when it crashed shortly after takeoff. The cause of the crash has not yet been identified and a huge rescue operation is underway. While Dokdo is under control of South Korea, its sovereignty is contested by Japan. Dozens of people in the Palestinian city of Ramallah protested in solidarity with a Jordanian citizen who has been detained in an Israeli prison for more than 2 months without charge. The protesters have called for the immediate release of Hiba Labadi, who was arrested on August 24th while attending a family wedding in the West Bank. Tel Aviv claims that Labadi was arrested for security offenses, but it has failed to specify what those offenses are. On Tuesday, the government of Jordan recalled its ambassador to Israel in protest against Labadi's continued detention.
These protests and rallies are for solidarity with our female and male prisoners in the occupation jails, especially the prisoners who are on hunger strike, especially the prisoner Hiba Labadi, whose life is in danger. We are all hearing one voice that says that we are the prisoners, both men and women.
New fires have broken out in California in the United States, forcing the evacuation of at least 7,000 people. Hundreds of firefighters and water-dropping helicopters were deployed to fight 3 new massive fires in San Bernardino, Riverside County, and Ventura County. The governor of California declared a statewide state of emergency earlier in the week as wildfires, which have been intensified by strong winds, have continued to ravage various regions. In other news, South Africans are looking forward to Saturday's Rugby World Cup final. That is because the national team, known as the Springboks, is hoping for a win against England. Our correspondent, Matuba Malachi, takes a look at the politics behind the game of rugby in South Africa.
The 1995 Rugby World Cup memories have brought nostalgia in the now racially polarized South Africa. The country's national rugby team could not have chosen a better time to win the World Cup. It was just over a year into Nelson Mandela's Rainbow Nation project, uniting people of all races in the country. Sports has always been the one thing that united South Africans throughout the years. It's now 2019 and the Springboks, as the rugby team is affectionately known here in South Africa, will launch their bid to win the Rugby World Cup against former colonial master England in Japan. Mandela's Rainbow Nation is no more, but government is still pulling all the stops to get South Africans behind the team.
Well, you've got 57 million South Africans standing behind you.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate the call and the support. It really means a lot to us on the team. And yeah, we'll do our best tomorrow to make you guys proud that we have been, and hopefully see you in the final.
Well, I am coming to the final. I am coming to lift that Webb Ellis trophy with you. So make sure that you book my ticket to the final. I'm going to be there.
The team managers were strategic and selected a black man to lead the team as captain. The number of black players in the Springbok team has been a debate that divided the country. It's arguably the one national team that hasn't transformed in post-apartheid South Africa. The one thing they are credited for by some commentators is their passion when singing the national anthem, which is divided into 4 of the official languages. But there's another debate that English and Afrikaans should not have been added to the anthem. The argument being that they are languages of the oppressor. While that debate rages on, all eyes will be on the team on Saturday with the hope they will bring the Webb Ellis Trophy to South Africa. Matuba Malachi for Telesur in Pretoria, South Africa.
Well, that was our correspondent Matuba Malachi bringing us to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on Starsat channel 461 in South Africa and channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.